Let's get into a bit of a bigger picture. The Africa Risk Capacity, or ARC, has released a new report on the state of natural disasters on the continent as the level of claims payout increases due to the frequency and severity of occurrences on the continent. My guest on this is the head of African Risk Capacity, Ibrahima Diong. He's also the Assistant Secretary General at the United Nations. We thank you for your time. Good to see you again. Good evening.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
It's good getting back together again. Thank you so much for coming in tonight. I hope you have a very good day. Tell me more about the new report detailing the state of natural disasters across Africa. Summarize it for me.
Well, what we do on an annual basis, we look at the state of disaster of the continent. A couple of interesting findings. One, and there is an increased climate incidence across the continent, showing that extreme weather conditions, unfortunately, are here for many, many years to come. Second, it really has an impact on our agriculture, on our infrastructure, our property across the continent, and to some degree to our economy as well. Now, on top of those disasters, the one that come on top is flood. Almost about 66% of the disaster we see across the continent happen to be flood, followed by drought, which you may have seen recently in Southern Africa. The El Nino has caused tremendous damage in the region, both in terms of impacting the economies, but also the people on the continent. And then last but not least, tropical cyclone and other disasters on the continent. Now, the two impacts that are extremely important to notice, and that is the economic losses. And we lost about $8 billion in 2023 because of natural disasters across Africa. And it's projected about $50 billion of loss by 2050, across the continent. But the most important part is the human losses. About 250 million people between 2020 and 2050 across Africa were going to be affected by natural disasters. There is an urgency to take actions as quickly as possible to save lives and protect our economies across Africa.
Yes, you should just touch on my second question on the consequences in terms of material losses that you are seeing in Malawi, in Zimbabwe. And these are two of the countries in which the ARC has intervened, making check payouts in recent times, in recent months this year. Give me the January to date update on your activities in terms of claim payouts. Bring me up to speed on that.
Right. I think what's important is not just recognizing the state of the disasters in terms of what do we do about it in terms of solution. There are three things that are extremely critical in terms of solutions before I come to what we've done recently in the region. Number one, we need to mainstream early warning system across Africa. I believe it's important for our policymakers to make informed decisions based on data. And I'm pleased to see that across Africa, that is the trend in making sure we have access to data so we can make informed decisions. Second, within our governments, you may have noticed oftentimes when there's a disaster, we tend to be quite overwhelmed because of lack of coordination within government. I think it's extremely important, our contingency planning, our coordination with the government really to be strengthened in a way that we can react and react quickly so we can lose no life across Africa. I think the last point is where we come in, and that is to say, can we put some financial instrument whereby we can deal with climate shock? Now, at ARC, we obviously promote leveraging the insurance market so we can actually mobilize additional resources to finance the early response of our government. Recently, in Southern Africa, when they faced with El Nino, we made a payout of $60 million for 4 countries, and that is Zimbabwe, Zambia, Mozambique, and Malawi. And that shows that the African risk capacity model works. Because, as you know, in the case of disasters, the first days, the early days, are extremely critical. That's when you save life and livelihood. At ARC, since our inception, we provided up to $1.2 billion worth of coverage across Africa, about $160 million of payout, but also more importantly, protected about 150 million Africans across Africa. And that is the type of initiative we need to strengthen and scale up so that Africa could be part of the solutions before the rest of the international community come to our support.
Interesting what the ARC is doing under the umbrella of the African Union, of course, creating this window of an organization a few years ago and put you at the top of it. But when you also sitting at as an Assistant Secretary General for the United Nations, so I'm sure the recent African Climate Roundtable was a very crucial conference or summit. What are the takeaways for you at the ARC from the African Climate Roundtable conference?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, we wanted to demonstrate to our roundtable that the global climate crisis calls for global solidarity. If you look at the roundtable, the conveners were global players, African players, and the idea of coming together was our way of demonstrating that the climate crisis can only be addressed when we come together. Second, if you look at the climate crisis in terms of financial commitment, we talk a lot about the supply side. In other words, what the international community should commit so we can get additional resources. What we want to do in our roundtable is to focus on the demand side by saying, number one, what does Africa need today in dealing with climate crisis? And that is in terms of funding, in terms of early warning system, but also in terms of policy and capacity building. So what the roundtable did is allow us to put on the table, this is what we want as Africans in terms of dealing with the climate crisis. Number two, we want to make the case of the urgency and scaling up climate finances, not only for terms of adaptation, but also green climate financing, so we can support African ambitions and plan, and then eventually the investment opportunity for green economy. I think third, at the round table, what we managed to do is to demonstrate that it is extremely critical that as the international community make pledges in terms of providing financing, those pledges need to be honored. That's the only way we can demonstrate that we're actually serious about climate finance. You know very well, Africa contributes less than 4% to greenhouse gases, but nevertheless, we suffer from the climate crisis. What we want to do at the roundtable to demonstrate it is extremely fair and important that we come to support Africa, and that's what the roundtable did. So we hope by the time we actually get some funding coming from the international community, we know exactly where Africa, where the money should be directed to, and make sure that Africa is on the forefront. And that's what Roundtable is all about.
Director General of the African Risk Capacity, speaking to us here on Arise tonight on the climate change issues on Africa, the recent Africa Climate Roundtable that was done at the end of July, and how much has been paid so far, about $1.2 billion in terms of impact. Total payouts in claims around 160 to 70 million US dollars. Ibrahim Diong was talking about how to get further investments into the African continent to support what the African risk capacity is doing to support many African countries, in particular within the East and the Southern African community. So far this year, we've seen payouts to Zimbabwe, to Malawi, as part of a few other African countries. Thank you so much for that conversation. Unfortunately, we lost that signal there. Mr. Ibrahim Achang Diong, who is the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations and Director General at the African Risk Capacity. Thank you so much for bringing us up to speed. Let's get